Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Jessie and today I am wrapping up the books I read in September. Quality-wise, September was a pretty great reading month. Most of the books I read were 4 and 5 stars. There were a few 2 and 3 stars, but the 4 and 5 stars I think definitely outweighed them and I enjoyed them so much. Quantity-wise, the reading month is actually also a lot better than I expected. I really didn't think, with going back to school I would read as much as I had been reading, but I guess because I incorporated a few more audiobooks than I normally would, I managed to read close to, or pretty much exactly at, what I've been averaging for most of the year. So I'm really happy with what I'm reading, or how many books I read, and the quality of them as well. I think that this week I'm going to talk about the books in order from favorites to least favorites. But before I get started, I just wanted to take a moment to remind you to please like this video and subscribe to my channel to make finding my content just a little bit easier. My absolute favorite book that I read this month was The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. This book, I'm sure that there's a decent chance that you might have heard about it if you're actively following the book community. It's been all over the place all month, and I would say that for me at least, it was definitely worth the hype. This book follows Olive and Adam. Olive is a third-year PhD student, and she kind of wants to please and help everyone. She wants to also get her research she wants her research to have a chance to flourish, and so while she's trying to do all this other stuff to help her friends, at the same time she is also trying to get her research prepared to go to a bigger school for at least a year to have more resources and then come back to where she is and finish. The main point of the book really is probably her personal life. She was dating this other guy that her friend is now interested in, but her friend won't go after him because he and Olive dated, and she's afraid, I'm assuming, that it'll cross some type of boundary with Olive. So Olive, in order to help, decides that she will convince her friend that she's been dating someone and that she has moved on and there's nothing to worry about. And in order to do this, because she has not been dating someone, she decides to kiss the first guy she sees, which just so happens to be Adam, who is a professor in the department that she is in. And they ultimately end up in a mutually beneficial fake dating relationship, which was really fun to watch. It was really interesting to see, Olive for sure is interested in him, but she doesn't really think he could be interested in her. And also at the same time, for one reason or another, she has this belief that, she can't have people in her life like that. She can have friends, but she can't have people she truly loves, on, I guess, a more intimate level or a family level in her life for whatever reason. And so, they have this end date in sight, and you kind of follow the book up until that point to see what all is going to happen. And it was just really good. It was really cute. Olive is a very quirky character, but she's not written in a not like other girls kind of quirky. She seems, just genuinely quirky. She's pretty accident prone. She's apparently very prone to making messes because while in this fake dating relationship, she kind of accidentally keeps making things more and more complicated while trying to be helpful and trying to, make things easier for everyone else. She ultimately complicates things more and more for herself. But it was a really cute and fun book. It was really sweet. It's one that I could definitely see myself rereading. I actually already want to reread it, but there's a bunch of other books I also want to read. But this one was definitely worth the hype, and I rated it 5 stars if I hadn't said that already. My second favorite book in September was A Song of Wraith and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown. This book was also a 5-star rating. This book ends up following 2 characters named Karina and Malik. Karina, she is a princess in this one area, and things are going kind of okay, except she doesn't really like being princess. She doesn't really want to be queen, but then her mother's killed, and she finds out the only way to bring her mother back is to get the heart of a king and use that to bring her mother back to life, more or less. And so she decides that there's these games coming up for the Solstagia festival, and she decides that she'll make the winner her king, and then she'll murder him and use his heart. Malik, on the other hand, he and his sisters were trying to come into the city. They have lived in another area that has been suffering for years. They had fake papers made, and their papers were stolen, and then something happens to his youngest sister. Malik ends up essentially infiltrating those games and masquerading as one of the champions. He goes under a fake name. Him and Karina kind of show feelings for each other, but that's not the main point of the book. Malik is trying to do everything he can to save his sister, which is to kill Karina. And so, throughout the games, he's trying to kill her, but he is so anxious about it. He's very much an anxious character. He's very nervous about everything. He has a lot of trouble, I guess, moving on and acting on what he needs to do just because, of his nerves and stuff, kind of. And it's explained a whole lot better in the book than I'm explaining it. And then Karina also, which wasn't mentioned earlier, but I should mention, there's this tragic thing that happened to her family when she was a kid And she also has a lot of grief over that. And so I think one thing I really liked about this book is because as much as I enjoyed Karina and Malik and like watching them go through their own journeys of the book and kind of seeing, you know, hints at a relationship building, I also really enjoyed the way this book kind of looked at mental health in these two characters because they both were going through so much. But I just know this was a great book and I really enjoyed it, and I can't wait for the second book to come out. I don't remember the name of the second book, but it comes out, I believe, in November, so I'm excited to get a chance to read that then. My third favorite book of September was We Can Be Heroes by Kiri McCauley, and this was another 5-star read. I actually read this as an ebook first, and then I went ahead and bought the book just because it was great and I want to reread it in the future. So this book is about two girls. It's a few months after one of their best friends die, and they are essentially working to move on from the event, but also get revenge on the town because there are certain aspects of the town that played a huge part in why their friend died. Their friend was murdered by her ex-boyfriend whose dad just so happened to own the gun factory that keeps the town afloat. That gun factory is essentially the only reason their town exists at this point because it's a fairly poor town, right? At the beginning of the book, you come across Beck. She is making a mural in Cassie's honor. Cassie's the friend who died. And Vivian, who is their other friend, ends up coming up and finding her doing it. And Vivian and Beck haven't spoken in months. But they end up deciding to work together to paint these murals all over the town that are about Cassie. And they're going to post it on Instagram and draw people's attention to it to raise awareness about gun violence and domestic violence and, you know, the whole boyfriend loophole. And it was just really interesting. It was a really good book. The book was told from, you know, Beck and Vivian's third person POVs. Cassie's ghost had a like verse POV throughout the novel. Like there'd be a couple of chapters from Beck and Vivian and then it'd go through Cassie. And she would kind of, you know, tell the story of what happened to her as it was happening. And then, you know, Vivian and Beck, they can see Cassie's ghost and interact with her. And that's kind of like what sparks them to start working on revenge, right? And then there's also this podcast. And there's this woman who has this podcast called We Can Be Heroes, and she decides to start covering this town, and that helps bring more and more attention to it. This book at the beginning kind of reminded me of Sadie by Courtney Summers and The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. So it reminded me of Sadie in the sense that, you know, there's this podcast element, and then it's about, you know, two girls trying to avenge their best friend, which is also, the avenging their best friend part also kind of reminded me a little bit of The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. But as the book goes on, you realize like it's still definitely about a little bit about revenge, but at the same time, it is also about moving on, dealing with grief, and trying to figure out what the next step of Beck's and Vivian's lives will be. But I absolutely love this book so much. It was such a great read. Definitely made me sad at the end because on top of, you know, Cassie's death, Beck and Vivian have other stuff going on in their lives. Like that Vivian was a little bit more affected by some parts of the shooting than others because Vivian was there, whereas Beck has other stuff going on in her personal life. And then at the very end, you find out something interesting about Merrick, and just, it was a really good book. And definitely one that I would suggest reading if you get a chance to. I think it came out at the beginning of September, but I haven't really seen very many people talking about it, and it was definitely a great read. Next we have Battle Royal by Lucy Parker, and this book follows Sylvie and Dominic. Sylvie and Dominic are both professional bakers, and they kind of work across the street from each other and have like rival bakeries. 4 years prior, Sylvie was on this show called Operation Cake, where Dominic was one of the judges, and he really didn't like her style of baking, made it very well known, especially with his very harsh critiques, and Sylvie was ultimately voted off the show. Now it's 4 years later, they have very different aesthetics, and they're also both judging Operation Cake as well as competing to make the royal wedding cake. And along the way, they end up working together a little bit, and you actually kind of see them kind of fall for each other, and it's actually, I really don't know how else to describe it because that's really, I think, the main points of the book. But the way it was handled, it was so cute. It was definitely funny and sweet, and I had a really good time with it. I've been very interested in romantic comedies lately, and so I think that's a lot of why I enjoyed it. Sylvie and Dominic were very fun characters to follow. Dominic was very, you know, I guess, almost boring according to Sylvie, and then Sylvie was like almost childish, like in terms of like her decoration style, like unicorns and glitter and stuff like that. But it was interesting to see how they work. It was definitely a really good book. It also introduces Dominic's little sister, who will, I think, have the next book. But it was just really good. I had a really good time with it. I'm thinking I'm liking cooking-based romances because I really enjoyed Sweet Hand back in August, and I had a really good time with this Battle Royal as well. Next is Arsenic and Adobo by Mia P. Manansala. And this book is a cozy mystery, and I didn't learn what that genre was until I found this book. This book follows Leela, and she's just moved back to her hometown after a pretty rough breakup with her fiance back in the city. She still ultimately wants to get back to the city and open her own, I think, bakery there. But for now, she is kind of feeling stuck helping her aunt and grandmother keep their restaurant afloat. And then one day, her ex-boyfriend, who also just so happens to be the town's food critic, comes into the restaurant and he dies while eating. He's there with a stepdad who also just so happens to own the building that they work in. Immediately, you know, Leela and her family, but especially Leela, are seen as the potential culprits. They are essentially being framed for what's going on, and so Leela essentially takes it into her own hands to figure out, you know, who actually killed him, because she knows it wasn't her or her family. And so I realized, you know, that cozy mysteries apparently are mysteries where, you know, the main character is trying to solve the crime, but none of the crime really happens on the page, which was really interesting, and it kind of reminded me of Murder, She Wrote. And so I think I liked that part of this mystery. Like, you know, I still got that mystery part of it, but it wasn't as stressful in the sense that, you know, I knew that this one would probably have a happy ending for the most part. This book also looks a little bit into Leela's love life, or her lack of a love life, which she isn't a huge fan of. She's always had a crush on this one guy, but for whatever reason, she's never felt comfortable pursuing it. And then she meets this other guy, which, like I said, the love part of the book, it really isn't a big deal for the story, but I liked the addition and how it was handled. I liked that, you know, it didn't end up being this huge thing. I really liked this book. I liked that, you know, by the end, Leela learned the importance of, you know, being available to help her family and being okay with being in this small town for now. And I'm wondering if this is going to be like a series where, you know, each book follows Leela solving a different crime, kind of almost like, you know, an episode of a show like Murder, She Wrote, because I think the next book comes out next year, and I think it also follows Leela after a death at a beauty pageant, which I'm really excited, and I hope I get to pick up and read that one as well. Next, I have The Crowns of Croswell by D.E. Knight. I rated that book 3 stars, and it was an okay book. This book follows a 16-year-old girl who just finds out that she is able to go to the school and be a scrivener, I believe, and she's able to learn how to use magic and write and use magic. I don't quite remember how it worked. I will say that the idea of the book was really interesting, but the way it was written kind of felt more old in a way, in some ways. But I did like the idea of the magic. I did like Ivy, the main characters. I liked her personality for the most part. I liked her friends that she made. I liked that she, you know, made a pretty good support system pretty quickly into the school. At the same time, I didn't love it. I didn't love the book. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I would have liked to. And so I really don't have much to say, because also it's been a while since I've read it and I don't quite remember as much about it. It's not as memorable as I would have liked for it to have been. But I do have like a review of it on my Instagram and Goodreads. But it's not a bad book by any means, but it just wasn't a good pick for me. I think if you like magical schools, you might like it. But it just, like I said, wasn't a good pick for me. Next, I have Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. In this book, I rated it 3 stars, mostly because I didn't actually know how to rate it. This is a horror novel. I read very little horror. I want to try to give it more chances, but at this point in time, I don't read it hardly ever. And so I had a little bit of trouble rating it because I didn't know what to expect. And I don't think it was quite what I was expecting, but it was interesting. This book is told primarily through email, but also it's made to be written as if the author, you know, got a hold of police records and is able to share them and, you know, kind of tell people what happened in the early 2000s. I don't remember the characters' names at this point, and I read the ebook, so I can't really check very well because it's not currently available on Libby. Someone else has it checked out. But at the beginning of the book, one of the main characters, she has listed this old apple peeler on a site that's similar to Craigslist, but is aimed at and targeted for queer people to use. And she puts it on there to sell because she needs help paying rent, and she knows that, like, this item should get some money. She ends up talking to this other person who's very interested in the apple peeler, and the person, you know, asks why you're wanting to sell it. And she tells her why, because even though it's an important family heirloom to her, it reminds her of something sad, and also she needs money. And this other person's like, well, don't sell it, I'll just send you the money. And they kind of build a correspondence back and forth. They appear, from what you can tell it's the reader, to be developing feelings for each other. And at some point, they enter into like a dom subcontract almost. And then the character who paid rent for the main character starts, you know, asking the main character to do like gradually more and more obscene things, and that's just kind of how the book goes. I would say that, like, some of the stuff, and because I had asked Chris, because Chris likes horror movies and stuff. I don't really like horror movies, and like I said, I'm trying to read a few more horror books to give the genre a chance. And I described the book to Chris, and Chris was like, yeah, that's horror, but it was kind of gross at some parts, which I guess I wasn't expecting, but it was interesting. I think I really liked the idea of the story being told through email, and like the whole idea of it, being told as if the author had gotten into contact with the police department or something, and was able to tell a true story, I guess. I don't know, it's like one of those stories I don't really know how to talk about, and also I don't know how to rate, and so I just kind of got a 3 stars because that seemed fair. Like, I didn't love the book, and it held my attention. I tried eating it or reading while eating one time, and that wasn't a good idea, just a heads up, but definitely an interesting read. I also read Not Hungry by Kate Carius-Quinn, and I rated it 3 stars. It is a YA novel in verse about the main character. She is overweight, and she is also developing an eating disorder to lose weight. And so it's kind of about her experience with that, her experience with meeting this boy who will talk to her in private and at home, but in public he doesn't want to be seen with her. And then it talks about her sister who, is also overweight and has a boyfriend that essentially walks all over her, but she just keeps doing it, or keeps letting him do it, essentially, or something like that. And it's just about, I don't quite know. It was interesting. It was definitely a look into, I guess, a teenager's mind with eating disordered habits. And it was also a quick and easy read, but I don't think it did as much for me as I would have liked for it to have done. I wish it was a little bit longer. I felt like everything all happened in such a short amount of time. Basically, I'm not quite sure how I felt about it, and so it's another book that got 5 or 3 stars because I didn't love it, but at the same time, I didn't hate it. It didn't do anything wrong, but it also isn't as memorable as I would like for it to be. And so it's an okay book, but I didn't love it. Next, we have The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. This book is about a therapist. He ends up going to work at this center where this woman who has a criminal case that he's very interested in lives at. And he wants to be the one to go and crack her case, figure out what happened, get her story out there, and help her recover, essentially. And the book is told from his present day point of view of getting the job, working with her, essentially playing an amateur detective because she won't speak, so he has to talk to other workers, other people in her life to figure out, what could have happened and all that. And in a way, it almost feels like he's being an amateur detective rather than a therapist. And it's kind of hard to tell, is he crossing lines in this sense because his patient can't tell him things, but is it okay for him to go seek out other people, more or less without her permission? And then other parts of the book are the girl's diary. Alicia, I believe is her name. And it's about her diary, and she, it's up until the crime. And then at some point it's after the crime. And you kind of find out, what leads up to all this happening and what leads up to her murdering her husband and what makes her stop speaking. So the idea of the story was really interesting, but as I started reading it, a few things kind of bothered me and made it to where I had a little bit of trouble enjoying the book. I think one of the first things that bothered me is just how unethical the male main character, the psychiatrist or psychologist, was. I don't quite know what bugged me about it, because I know it's fiction, and so these aren't real people, but I guess maybe thinking back to every class I took in my psychology bachelor's, literally I think every class had at least one chapter dedicated to ethics and stuff, and so maybe that's why it bothered me, and it just made it hard for me to enjoy the book. But another thing that kind of bothered me about the book is that every time intimacy was referred to, between a character and their partner, and it was Lucy's husband and the psychologist's wife, whenever intimacy was referred to, no matter which character it was never referred to in a loving way. It was always referred to in a very aggressive way. It came off to me slightly as the whole men writing women thing, which, like I said, may be a nitpick on my part, but it did kind of bother me. And then another thing that also kind of bothered me, and may also be another nitpick, but also kind of reminds me of men writing women, is first that, the psychologist kind of came off as a little bit of white knight. He really wanted to be the one to save Alicia. And I don't know, just, that may have been the whole point of the book, is that he was supposed to come off like that, but it kind of bothered me. And then also, most of the other women in the book were referred to as maternal figures, his own therapist and this other woman who works at the center, or they're evil, this other character who works, who lives in the center. or they are ill and in need of help, like Alicia. And like I said, these may all just be nitpicks on my part, but they all kind of bothered me and made me really struggle to enjoy the book. And so yeah, I didn't enjoy it very much, and it ended up being a 2-star read. And finally, for my least favorite book I read in September, it was A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This is a book I read because I've seen so many people talking about it. People like, share the cover all the time. It seems to be fairly popular. I'm also wanting to try some darker romances because I typically, when I read romance, I tend to gravitate towards contemporary or rom-coms, and so I wanted to try other stuff. But I don't think this book was a good pick for me. This book follows Persephone and Hades. The whole book is told from Persephone's first person point of view. It's like this alternate reality where the Greek gods were real, and they came, and like now they have like this city called New Athens, and it's essentially run like this big city. Kind of almost reminds me maybe of something like New York or like LA or something. Persephone is, and I think the senior year of her journalism degree, she is doing an internship at this big newspaper, and she decides that she is going to not necessarily take down Hades, who is, the Greek god that he is. He also owns this really big nightclub, and he likes to make deals with humans, and a lot of the deals, especially like to outsiders, come off as unfair. And so, Persephone's like, well, I'm gonna take him down, more or less. It doesn't quite happen like that, but it kind of does, because, she ends up accidentally in a deal with him. And I think the things that bothered me about this book is just, I don't quite know what it is, first of all. Like, I can't pin down the exact thing, and it's been a couple weeks since I've read it, so I may be kind of misremembering. But I feel like one of the things that bother me is, like, Persephone, like, she's one of those characters that, like, is apparently attractive because she's too innocent in some ways. She's too, like, she's not like a full woman yet in the eyes of some people in some ways, and it just kind of bothered me. The other thing that, I don't know, there's just a lot about the book that bothered me and just rubbed me the wrong way, and I don't know how to describe it first without spoiling the book. Also, I did a poor job at keeping notes on my reading this month. And finally, it's just not as memorable as I would like. I started reading the book, and like I kept thinking about DNFing it, but I didn't want to DNF it because I don't like DNFing books, first of all. And I know I need to get better at DNFing books I'm not enjoying, but I also really wanted to finish it. I wanted to see if it got better at some point. But I don't know. I didn't like the idea of Hades and Persephone together in this particular story. I didn't really like Hades in this particular story, or most other characters. Persephone, I'm not quite sure how I feel about her. I just know that this wasn't a good pick for me. Anyways though, as you can see, September really was, for the most part, a really good reading month. I enjoyed a lot of the books I read. I have a lot of books that I want to reread in the future. And I also have a lot of books that I want to pick up the sequels for whenever they come out. And so I'm actually really happy with the reading I got done in September. Anyways though, please let me know what your favorite book you read in September was, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.